Welcome to our event today. My name is Narelle Doan, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Biofilm Solutions. We are really excited to host this panel discussion today to talk about antimicrobial resistance, which has been recognized by the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control as one of the top 10 public health threats that we're facing as a nation and globally. But it's also an issue that a lot of people don't know much about, and so we want to change that today. So before we get into the discussion, I'd like to give our expert panelists a moment to introduce themselves. And Rodney, if you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Norelle. And again, thanks to Viking Pure and my esteemed panel. It's a pleasure to join you all today from Texas. So the quick story for me is that the first part of my career path for about a decade, early in my career from 92 to 02, I was a public health microbiologist with the Texas Department of Health. I did some really fun and amazing things there in microbiology overall, including rabies and other zoonotic disease. Just loved that workforce area of public health. And in 2002, I had an opportunity to transition to academia. And so I'm at Texas State University in the Medical Laboratory Science program. But really, I describe myself as a hybrid professional because of that public health experience. I've got one foot kind of firmly planted in public health, and I have the other foot planted in healthcare in the medical lab. And I am a credentialed specialist in microbiology, virology, and molecular diagnostics. And my educational background is in those areas, and my PhD is in kind of a public health adult learning area. So those are my passions, and I'll kind of keep it at that, and I'll let the next person introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I'm glad you're here with us today. John Scherberger, please introduce yourself to the panel.
Good afternoon, all. My name is John Scherberger. I am a healthcare environmental services expert, subject matter expert for infection prevention, for environmental services, for healthcare laundry and linens, for food service, and so many other things. One lady told me if she didn't know me, she would think that I couldn't hold a job. But I work and consult throughout the country at all sorts of facilities, long-term care, hospitals, and wherever I'm needed. I'm also an author, and I write numerous articles. I've written numerous articles in healthcare field. Recently, I cover the gamut from biofilm to just plain old what causes microbial resistance. And so I'm glad to be here, and I hope that I'm able to help answer some of your questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Last but not least, Daniel Lawson, my colleague and our co-founder and president of business affairs here at Viking Solutions. Take the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Narelle. And thank you, Dr. R, John, for joining us today. Just a huge honor to be able to share this space with you, as well as all of this information that I think, is becoming a much more pertinent topic of conversation, not only in the healthcare fields, but in senior living and even in the education space. So for the variety of, individuals who may be joining us today, I hope you find this conversation to be enlightening, educational, and I hope we can all walk away with, a much clearer perspective, regarding, this challenge I think that we're all facing. And I'm just excited to kind of jump right in here. So thanks, Narelle.
Awesome. Well, before we start, guys attending, if you have any questions for our panelists throughout the discussion, please feel free to pop those in the chat or in the Q&A window. And you can access either of those on the right-hand side in the vertical panel there. So let's get started with Rodney. Let's start with a general one. What is antimicrobial resistance? What are we looking at?
Yeah, great. So that's a big O question, right? And I know my colleagues would agree. So, really antimicrobial resistance, I often refer to it as kind of the slow burning pandemic. We've lived through a pandemic, we're still dealing with COVID, but in reality, AMR, which you'll hear us say a lot today, antimicrobial resistance, has really been around really since the inception of penicillin back in the 40s of the last century. In fact, right when penicillin, before it was even used therapeutically, Fleming and his associates were already seeing some resistance from Staphylococcus. And so, kind of the big answer for AMR is that bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, helminths, other types of microbes, when you put them in the environment of overuse, misuse, pressure, environmental pressure, there's so many drugs around them, whether it's in a human being or whether it's in animal feed or whether it's in the water supply, in the environment, whatever you talk about. And you can also put in there, which I know my colleagues will speak to, disinfectants, other types of drugs or chemicals that are trying to defeat these animals, these creatures. They actually will evolve. And so they'll mutate to the point to where suddenly, for instance, penicillin is no longer effective against a particular bacteria, or it's greatly reduced, right? So when I transitioned into academia, most of my research was in the virology world. I was working with rabies and hantavirus and all the zoonotic agents. But long story short, again, I couldn't work with a level 4, level 3 virus at Texas State at the time. They didn't have the facility. So I transitioned to MRSA, which was very fortuitous. My father has dealt with it over his life due to working on the railroad. He has really bad knees and ankles, so he's had multiple pins and screws and knee replacements, and he actually picked up MRSA somewhere along the way. And so it's been a personal and professional kind of journey for me. My entire dissertation was dealing with MRSA, but we know that global reach of all agents, of all types of drugs and disinfectants and chemicals are in that umbrella term. And I thought I'd just quickly, before I change subjects here for the next person, if you looked at the data right now, the WHO, this is one of their top priorities, AMR. And globally right now, almost 5 million deaths per year associated with AMR, especially when you think of those low and middle income countries. And so it's definitely a killer. It's pushing up to 5 million deaths a year. Most data shows just a huge millions and millions, if not billions of dollars on economic impact when you start thinking about wages and healthcare cost and animal industry issues and all of those things that are tied to it. So I hope that gives you a big picture, but it's really about the bug, whatever it is, changing in the face of the use of some of these things. And so infection prevention that John talked about and your company deals with is really critical because, God help us, hopefully we'll have antimicrobials and therapy forever, but we're losing the ability to use some of those drugs. They're not easily developed. They're not as many in the pipeline. So what do? We attack getting the infection, right? And so really that secret weapon is old school, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's where we're focused. And I look forward to hearing my colleagues talk a little bit about that from the standpoint of their experiences.
Absolutely. Dan, if you want to get into a little bit of how the misuse and or overuse, such as we saw with the pandemic, of antimicrobials and disinfectants, how does that contribute to antimicrobial resistance?
Yeah, great question. Certainly a loaded one too. There's so many different facets to to trying to, I think, fully comprehend the ability of these microorganisms to adapt. I mean, they are as resilient as humans, right? Like in our ability to kind of adapt to our specific environments and to thrive, quite frankly. But we saw a lot of unique behaviors, throughout the pandemic. However, this challenge, right, it predates the pandemic, for eternity. We've constantly been, kind of fighting this battle against, germs and their ability to, adapt, not only to the environment, but to the techniques that we are trying to leverage to eradicate them and to create a safe space for ourselves, our patients, students, et cetera. But, I think, as of kind of the pandemic being that it's still fresh on our minds, I think we would all agree that today, we're cleaning and disinfecting more than we ever have before. Potentially we're using more chemicals kind of in our armamentariums, than we ever have before. And, the misuse and overuse of these products contribute to antimicrobial resistance through kind of a handful of different things. I think we need to just take a basic, look or have an appreciation for the fact that, the resistance to these disinfectants that we're seeing is mainly the result of the germ's ability to decrease the concentration of that disinfectant internally, and to keep it at lower than harmful thresholds, thus allowing it to live amongst, that specific solution. Mechanisms like changing in the cell's envelope, what kind of encapsulates the specific germ, changes in its permeability, its efflux and degradation can all be, essentially reasons that we see this. And some of these kind of qualities can be intrinsic of the germ or can be acquired in time. So it's really something that we're chasing after consistently. There's also, substantial laboratory evidence that suggests that using disinfectants, cleaning solutions at lower than lethal concentrations on a regular basis can just, contribute to this, kind of rapid ability of a bacteria to develop a resistance. So it's like super crucial that when using cleaning and disinfecting agents, we're using them at the proper concentrations to kill these germs rapidly. And then finally, and I think more kind of in line with the topic du jour, if you will, other contributing factors to decreased susceptibility is the creation of biofilms on surfaces and the ability of these biofilms to persist, through more traditional kind of cleaning and disinfecting techniques. And the ability of the professional, on the front line doing this work to adequately remove those biofilms from the surface. And, to be able to, I think, do that effectively, we need to consider not just, the chemicals that we're using, the concentrations that they're being used, but also the materials used to permit mechanical removal of that, that biofilm from the surface, such as like a healthcare ultra grade microfiber product. So, and we could talk about a few of those things, but I think that, understanding that, when you're finished cleaning and you're feeling, potentially a sticky residue on the surface where your feet, kind of are sticking to the floor, or you see streakiness on stainless steels or on glass or whatever, is to understand that, we shouldn't be receiving that outcome, in an ideal environment that we're cleaning. And the clinical ramifications of those residues are really contributing to these challenges. So we'll talk more about kind of newer technologies that are, welcoming into the space that, that can alleviate some of these challenges. But I think we need to first understand that it's just not acceptable to have this type of an outcome in a world where now we are forced to really clean and disinfect much more frequently than we ever have before.
Absolutely. That's a great transition going into my question for John, what are some of the strategies that healthcare facilities in particular can adopt to minimize the emergence and spread of antimicrobial resistant strains of things like MRSA and staph, from your opinion?
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, there has to be a change of culture in environmental services, the department that does the cleaning and disinfecting and rendering the safe spaces for patients, for staff, for visitors. They have been, for so long, convinced that they have to use a chemical that smells strong, a chemical that smells good, that is colorful, and that has to come from a major manufacturer. But the problem is with the culture they think all this, they have people who are purchasing all these things not based on science. Oftentimes they're based on price. But when we look at what we're supposed to be using, we should be looking at safety first. Safety for the patient, safety for the individual partner that's doing the cleaning, safety for our environment, both the built environment, and safety for our biome, the environment outside. But one of the problems that we have is that the chemicals that people have, it's always been drilled into somebody, regardless of their background. But if a little bit is good, a lot's going to be better. When people are looking at C. difficile or Candida auris, they're thinking, well, I know that one company says we're supposed to be using a 10% bleach solution. Well, if 10% is good, then 20% is probably even better. So one of the problems that we have in cleaning environments is that most people are using what's called a J-fill system. So, and those are controlled by little valves, little plastic pieces that they stick in. And sometimes they pull those little pins out and change them with larger ones, or they don't put pins in them at all. And I was at a hospital this week, and they said, well, if we use this, it doesn't have very good smell on it. So I'm going to add this chemical, and it's going to make it smell better. But they don't understand that this chemical and this chemical can cause a reaction to them, to the environment, and it can become ineffective towards the microbes that they're trying to destroy. Now, I use the term destroy as opposed to kill, because when we're working with viruses, we're not killing viruses, because viruses are not alive. The other thing that we have is, on the call I had yesterday, one of the infection preventionists was concerned about the potential of mixing chemicals. And I said, well, one of the benefits of using hypochlorous acid, and especially from Viking Pure, is that the hypochlorous acid, although it is a disinfectant and it is on EPA registration, and it is a product that kills bacteria, it is safe for the human body, because hypochlorous acid is generated by the human body in the white blood cells. Now, we're not getting white blood cells from the body. We're manufacturing it with electricity, salt, and water. An offshoot of that is a sodium hydroxide. And even if someone was to mix those two chemicals, they would not be mixing any kind of chemical solution that would be dangerous to them or the environment. I hope that I answered the question there.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at the solutions that you're using, and then also making sure that you're having, if you're mixing chemicals, not mixing them incorrectly, and then also using correct dilution potency for the chemicals. Of course, ideally for labor-wise, you want to use ready-to-use solutions, but that can have environmental impacts as well. And I think Dan will get into that a little bit more later as well.
If I can add one thing, ready-to-use solutions, that's exactly what Viking Pure provides.
Yes.
Because when Viking Pure sets a machine up in their factory, they set the proper ppm, parts per million. They set the proper dilution. Everything comes set. So it's idiot-proof, if I can use that term. I do refer
Talking
to
us up, John.
well, I call things as I see them. So the staff, when they decide that they're going to use this, they can't change the parts per million.
Mm-hmm.
What comes out of the machine is what they get. There's no playing around with it, as opposed to the J-fill units. And also, to go back with a ready to use, you are mixing it on site, so it is ready to use. You're not paying for someone else's water. You're not paying for the diesel. You're not paying for destruction of our environment. You're reducing a carbon footprint. But the most important thing is, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, but I will say this. When people ask about, well, does HOCl, how does it contribute to stopping bacteria or microbes from becoming resistant to them? Well, it's because of the free available chlorine electrons. And they not only come to the microbe, but they kill or destroy the microbe. So a microbe cannot build up any resistance to it because it has a very strong chlorine molecule or electron. And so something that is dead and destroyed cannot build up a resistance. Whereas if we're using a chemical such as a quat, if it is not allowed to have the contact time, then the microbes that remain on the surface may not have been destroyed. And so in this case, what is meant to kill them makes them stronger.
Yeah, I do. I know we're going to get to that in a little bit, but thank you for touching on that to kind of get the ball rolling. I want to switch gears a little bit because we've been talking about antimicrobial resistance and how it forms and all that, but there's a related issue that, it's in the title today. But Rodney, if you could get into kind of what is biofilm, how does it relate to antimicrobial resistance, and how does it form?
Sure. Thanks, Norel. I mean, really and truly, you can't use one term without the other these days. I mean, you can scientifically, but they are so well tied together with respect to how microbial adaptation is occurring within that biofilm. And as I kind of move into that, one thing I just want to kind of applaud John and Daniel on talking about here that I've become very passionate about in my career over the past decade or so is accurate science communication. And so, the whole framework of what we're talking about and how critical it is for leaders, for those in the trenches of doing EVS and doing IP and doing different microbiology, doing laboratory testing, is to make sure we understand what we're saying, what we're doing, and that the public has become such an important factor on engagement and how they're using their products and things like that. So I just really appreciate, again, the opportunity to kind of spread that science communication, because it's a global issue in all areas of science and medicine right now. And speaking of good, accurate science communication, let's talk about biofilms a little bit. So biofilms have actually been around, right, for a long time. So if you've ever seen a little bit of slime, for example, on a rock, like in a stream, or maybe you've seen something show up on a shower curtain, or you've seen something on drywall, kind of a slime layer. We actually even have it on our teeth. That's why you brush your teeth and you floss so much, is because microbial communities naturally excrete different types of substances that become this formation of biofilms. And they really start when a group of microbes sense a given surface. So microbes can actually do something called quorum sensing, and we don't have to go into that world, but it's almost a chemical sight. They can kind of sense the surface, and they will adhere to that surface, and that's called colonization. And once, especially bacteria, but fungi and things like that can do this as well. Once they colonize a surface, they will start producing an extracellular polysaccharide matrix that we're going to call EPS. That's just a big old term that's basically means a sugary, slimy mixture. And it's very sticky, as you can imagine. And that really helps bacteria to entrench and allow them to start creating channels. And so sometimes when you look in the literature, they'll talk about these colonies. Imagine not just a single colony of bacteria, but it could be different species. It could be staph and Pseudomonas and other things kind of coming together in these communities. So it's a population, And I want you to envision in your mind's eye kind of a shell of sticky matrix, but I want you to think of that shell kind of like a bulletproof vest. And so it becomes a shield. And within that shield, you actually have trenches. So it's almost like a channel that kind of moves around that particular population. And that allows bacteria to communicate, while under this shield, they can share resistance factors. They can encourage their own nutrient production. They can get rid of waste. They can get rid of other things. And they basically become a very problematic community that allows them to resist any type of penetration or influx of drugs, disinfectants, and so forth. And we could get into the weeds of this, but it's really, really problematic because these things can adhere to medical devices. They can adhere to catheters. They can adhere to IVs. They can adhere to surfaces in the hospital. They can adhere to sheets and pillows and curtains and bed rails and your hands. And I mean, so it's just about all surfaces on deck at any given time can be allowed to move these things around. And it's really a challenge, right? That's why this is such a difficult topic to kind of deal with respect to getting it right. And so as John has talked about and Dan has talked about, if you don't think about biofilms and you don't do something about biofilms, the question begs itself, are you really disinfecting? Because if you're not getting rid of that biofilm, even if you kill the surface platonic bacteria that might be kind of on the top level of things, 48 hours later, it may be back, or 24 hours later. And so it can reseed, and medically this is problematic because these are sometimes called persister cells or survival cells. It's little pieces of biofilm that can unhinge or break off and get into other parts of the body or other sites. And so it can become mobile. And I'll talk a little bit more later because I know we're going to talk a little bit about mechanisms for how AMR occurs, but that kind of ties into that closeness. Again, keeping your visual mindset. It's not one bacteria. It could be multiple bacteria that are commingling. And when they get together, bad things happen. They start sharing resistance factors and they really make it problematic for the environment.
For sure. Dan, did you want to comment on anything before I ask John another question?
Yeah, it just blows my mind, like to hear that and to think that, a germ can just have these capabilities. And I just wanted to kind of, echo, the creation of some of these, biofilms on surfaces inside of a healthcare facility. I mean, we even see this on surfaces that are treated with antimicrobial coatings, that, we hope, or when we apply these solutions proactively, or you're going to have this preventative capability of, killing germs on surfaces when they come in contact. But the one thing that they can't really combat against is biofilm. And that's why, there is no alternative to cleaning and disinfecting, that process going to maintain. And I think, to Dr. R's point, awareness, of this challenge is the first step.
For sure.
Just one more quick point, Dan, and I'll let you transfer to someone. But I always, part of my world is being a microbiologist. What fascinated me to become a microbiologist was the first time I sat down at a microscope, whether it was a compound or an electron microscope, and I got to peer into this amazing world of viruses and bacteria. So, part of this engagement with your users and with the public when they have someone in the healthcare facility that they love and care about is, and to John's point, it can smell great. It can be, oh man, my own mother does this, right? And I'm a microbiologist. And so I'll talk to this about her. She's like, yeah, but Rodney, your dad's in this particular room, the doctor's doing this or that. And it just smells so nice. They've really cleaned it up and disinfected. I'm like, yeah, but Mom, clean does not always mean microbially clean, right? So you cannot see these guys. You have to remember they're invisible. And while we want to trust that things are clean and we hope to get there, there's nothing wrong with asking questions and being aware of this kind of hidden battlefield, in all honesty, that's going on at the microbial level that you really don't know is going on. So you have to really be adamant and educated and ask questions when you go into these sites for treatment.
Absolutely, for sure. John, kind of switching a little bit here, what challenges, in your opinion and experience in the healthcare risk mitigation side of things, what challenges does biofilm present in terms of infection prevention, controlling it, and then also how does biofilm formation contribute to treatment resistance in the healthcare setting?
That is a multifaceted question. So I will just say that in environmental services, they have been doing things with the same products, with the same tools, getting the same results for years, and not recognizing the results that they're getting are not satisfactory. It's just coming about that environmental services people, cleaners and janitors, those who are tasked with the responsibility of providing, whether it's a hygienic site or a safe site, they need to understand, and some of them are coming around, that you cannot disinfect without cleaning. And we clean it first, and then we can remove the detritus, this polysaccharide covering, but cleaning of biofilm. But cleaning is not just spraying on a cleaner and disinfecting. There has to be a mechanical action. Whether we're talking about a person going into some ductwork and spraying it with high pressure air, or spraying it with high pressure water, or using a scrubber on the floor with a cleaner, or most likely on a surface that is a patient touch point, a people touch point, there has to be mechanical action. My preference is to have a healthcare grade ultra microfiber, which provides excellent abrasion to all surfaces so that it can disrupt the cells, it can disrupt and remove the dirt, and it can then provide a means for using a disinfectant. But the problem is education. The problem is people understanding that there is a scientific basis for cleaning. Science is cleaning. Science is not just smelling, spraying an air freshener. It's a matter of going through, removing, trapping, capturing, and removing the dirt, and then trapping, capturing, and removing the pathogen, the biofilm, the microbes. Now, not every microbe is a pathogen, but what is a pathogen to me may not be a pathogen to the listeners, and what is a pathogen to the listeners may not be a pathogen to me. So we have to have a standard of cleaning, which means we remove the dirt, the detritus, and then we provide a disinfectant, which is this hypochlorous acid, to kill the pathogens, the microbes, and we remove it with a healthcare grade ultra microfiber, whether it's a wiper or a mop. And then we send it to the laundry and have it cleaned properly.
So really it's the challenge of finding the right tools in order to deal with the biofilm, like behind the shield, as Dr. R mentioned earlier. So getting past that shield using tools like hypochlorous acid, using the healthcare grade ultra microfiber, etc. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly it. Using the proper tools, not just having them, but using the proper tools in a proper way with the right disinfectant, the right amount of pressure and the right amount of time. I'd like to go back and just say one thing, and I've said this to doctors, I've said it to nurses. When they are telling an environmental services person to go clean a patient's room, discharge room, because they need it for another patient, and they're saying you have 5 minutes or you have 10 minutes, that's why we need a 1 minute or 3 minute or 5 minute kill claim for a disinfectant. I stopped them and I asked them, "Doctor, are you a surgeon?" "Yes, I am," they say very proudly. "What do you do?" "Well, I'm a general surgeon. I can take out a gallbladder. I can take out infected parts of the body." And I said, let's say you want to take out a gallbladder. "How long is it going to take you to take out that gallbladder?" "Well, do it properly." I said, "Of course you're going to do it properly and safely. It's going to take me maybe an hour." "All right." And then I turn to a nurse. I say, "Nurse, you are specialized training in placing a PICC line on for a vein." She says, "Yes." I say, "Can you do that in a minute?" "No, I can't do that in a minute." I said, "Why not?" "Because it's not safe for my patient." I said, "Then why do you expect a professional environmental services person to go in and clean a room properly and make it hygienically safe in a minute, or to follow the doctor in 5 minutes?" We can't do it. We are putting patients at risk if we're putting them in a room that we have not had the proper time, the proper chemicals, the proper training to do that job. We are putting patients at risk. And it's all a matter of proper training and changing a culture. And according to the great information Roddy has provided, it's a matter of science. They don't need to know all of these things that Dr. Rode knows, but they have to know something about the science of cleaning, because cleaning is a science.
Absolutely. Thank you. Those are important points for sure. Rodney, you spoke a little bit earlier about this, but maybe just touching back on it briefly, how does biofilm help perpetuate antimicrobial resistance? And then following up on that, what are the mechanisms for antimicrobial resistance of bacteria and biofilm?
Yeah, and again, I so appreciate John's comments. Again, just to reiterate my career journey here, I work pretty closely with IPs. I have students that leave the medical lab science and kind of shift careers into IP because they're naturally microbiologists and infectious disease specialists, like to work as IPs sometimes. My new daughter-in-law is a nurse, and I work with pharmacy in many cases. So to John's point, whether it's a physician, a nurse, a pharmacist, really anyone, it is a team effort. And while they don't need to know all the weeds and details of all the chemistry and microbiology that goes on in this, they do need to understand how critically important it is to patient safety. And I think John makes a great point. Patient safety leads to cost savings, leads to better health outcomes. I mean, these are things people want. So, we have to allow the time and the necessary accuracy of what people are doing with your products and with other kind of multimodal approaches to preventing infections. Coming back to biofilm again, and to John's point, I love him talking about this kind of science communication piece, because I'm going to give you a few terms here that maybe the general public doesn't think about, but then I want to bring it back to a way I try to explain it to my grandmother, for instance. So bacteria especially are notorious for being able to utilize certain mechanisms to create antimicrobial resistance. So one of the ways they do this, again, I want you to think about bacteria. They can be rod shaped, they can be circles, they can be corkscrew shaped. There's all sorts of bacteria, and they often have these structures on the outside of their body called pili. And I want you to think of a pili like a finger. It just sticks out like a hair from their surface. And what they typically are used for, it's called conjugation. And it's a way for bacteria to touch these pili they come together and touch, and they copy over like DNA. That's called horizontal transfer. What does that mean? That means in normal reproduction, bacteria just divide in two. Human beings have sexual reproduction, and we can share our genes, our traits to our children and our grandchildren and so forth. Bacteria don't have to do that, right? That means that if me and Norel touched fingers, can you touch my finger across the screen there, Norel? If we touched fingers, I could give her gray hair right now. Wouldn't you love that? It's instantaneous horizontal transfer. Now think of a bacterium transferring the ability to resist carbapenemins or methicillin. They do it instantaneously. And so when you put bacteria in a population, again, commingling, staph, Pseudomonas, whatever, and let's say staph has resistance, it's MRSA, Pseudomonas can instantaneously acquire methicillin resistance by pili touching. It is a diabolical and nasty characteristic that bacteria have that we don't even have. I mean, it would be crazy to be able to transmit genetics by touching, much less going through a sexual reproduction route. So, again, kind of bringing that back home, that touching and transferring resistance, that's what I use sometimes when I'm talking to the public, because it is a visual, right? It's not in the world of, oh my God, what's he talking about? Conjugation and copying DNA into another cell. The idea is that it's instantaneous. And so timing is important, and that biofilm is important because now you're giving the opportunity for these bacteria and fungi and other things to basically create defense mechanisms. And I mean, rapidly. This is not taking months to do. This is sometimes within hours. And so you have that going on. You have the ability of viruses called bacterial viruses to sit down and inject different DNA or RNA into bacteria. There's transformation. Again, we don't have to go into all these mechanisms, but just know that bacteria have been around way longer than human beings, and so have viruses, and they are the most adaptable, highly efficient, diabolical creatures when it comes to sharing these types of mechanisms. And I talked about a lot of this during COVID too, because people have to understand that viruses are even more problematic because they have really been around and they've really adopted the ability to do these things. So microbes exist for just a few things. They want to infect you, they want to amplify, and they want to transmit to the next host. That's their life cycle. They don't care about getting married and hanging out and enjoying life. They're built to reproduce and pass on these dangerous genes. So I'll kind of end there, but you can dig into some of these interesting features if you're out there listening. And there are some amazing, understandable YouTubes and other ways to kind of watch this in an animation style where it's not just text, right? It's really visually frightening to see how quickly this can happen. So I would encourage you to educate yourself if you haven't witnessed some of these things like conjugation and resistance mechanisms.
It's terrifying. Daniel, please pick this up for us. Tell us about
it's like the movie Alien or something. It's amazing.
What do we do? What are some innovative approaches and technologies like ours that are being explored currently that can address this?
Yeah, I mean, so I think you can kind of look at this, from two ways. You got your tangible versus your kind of your non-tangible, buckets. I think to start kind of on the non-tangible side, I think what you're seeing in the industries right now is a tremendous amount of awareness to this. And that awareness is leading to better training, better supervision, better ways of surveilling and or monitoring, the use and the performance of disinfectants. You can see from the conversations that, some like Keith Watkins up in New Rochelle are utilizing technologies like ATP or culturing, to kind of really justify, the utilization of their product and achieving certain thresholds post cleaning, post disinfection to ensure that the area has received adequate treatment. But there are amazing technologies that are out there that are emerging as well. I'm obviously a bit biased, here at Viking Pure to talk about this technology called electrolyzed water, which is an extremely well-established technology that creates non-toxic, ready-to-use, hospital-grade, EPA-registered solutions on site within your facility. Unlike traditional chemicals, these products don't have all of these different additives that can reside on surfaces for long periods of time to kind of contribute to this concept or phenomenon of adaptive resistance. We are also becoming much more aware, of solutions that are extremely well kind of accepted, within the industry, like quaternary ammonium compounds. I think kind of across really any type of environment, we see, quats almost being the go-to, product used for cleaning and disinfectant. And we're seeing most of this resistance come from, this category of chemicals. So knowing this, we see many who are identifying these solutions, kind of weighing the risk benefit profile of utilizing them within their environment, and certainly surveilling the opportunity for sublethal concentrations of these products to be used. And if that is the case, adjusting and fixing. I think the nice thing about having a technology that isn't utilizing normal manufacturing capabilities and are generating products on site, you're ensuring that the solutions are in a ready to use formulation so that your teams can go. And then when you couple those types of products that don't have, again, all of that, I like to call it baggage, right? The fragrances, the soaps, the colors, the different types of, substances that can be left behind. When you couple, the utilization of safer, non-toxic products that are effective with a healthcare ultra grade microfiber, you really do get that ultimate combination where you're killing the germs, but you're maximally trapping, capturing, and removing them, from the surface, so that when you're finished cleaning, not only are you, happy with the outcome, but you can kind of confidently sit there and know that you've removed some of these persistent, biofilms from the surface.
Awesome. I know that makes me feel better. John, I know you touched on this briefly before, the dual kind of approach of cleaning and disinfection, needing to remove the debris and then disinfect and kill the bacteria. But I would love for you to kind of head just a little bit further on that and explain the CDC's position on cleaning and disinfection as a dual part process and why that's important.
I'll be glad to. The one thing that Dr. Rhodes touched on that I don't want to be overlooked about biofilm is that a biofilm is not an isolated colony. It's not just Staphylococcus aureus. It's not just Acinetobacter baumannii. It's not just another bacteria. They can live together, and they can transfer their immunity, if you will, to each other. Am I right there, Doc?
You're absolutely correct. Absolutely. I mean, they can be single, but rarely. It's mostly combined, intermingling communities.
And the other thing that we need to understand about biofilm is that it's not just a bunch of bacteria getting together and forming a hard shell around it, because that hard shell is also on the bottom and grabs onto the surfaces. So it's not just a matter of mechanically removing the top, because as Dr. R said, you break off a piece, it's going to go someplace else and start growing again. We need to mechanically remove it. That's with a scrubber, with a healthcare grade ultra microfiber mop or wiper. That's with using a buffer, or with not really a buffer, a floor scrubber. It's also using the proper cleaner to clean it off, and the disinfectant to disinfect the surface and kill any other bacteria, virus, fungi, anything that is there. It is a multimodal, which means different products. It's a multidiscipline process where people need to understand that environmental services has a primary responsibility for cleaning, but it also means that if a nurse or a PCT or a PCA or even a guest or patient drops something on the floor, that can be the beginning of a biofilm. It needs to be wiped up as effectively as possible. There is no time limit when a biofilm can start. It doesn't have to be there 30 seconds. It doesn't have to be there 2 minutes, but it is going to form. To get to one of Dan's parts mentioned earlier is that a lot of these surfaces that we're finding in hospitals, people tend to think, those who are uninitiated in the proper cleaning science tend to think, well, that's a copper cover, or that's a copper item, or this is silver impregnated, silver nano parts, so we don't have to clean that. Well, that's one of the problems. They don't clean it, but we can still have bacteria. The microbiome, we can still have the microfilm. We can still have all sorts of things growing on it and proliferating. But the main thing, those things are good. The copper is good. The silver is good. But it does not mean that we should not wipe it off every day. Some people tend to think, well, I'm going to use an electrostatic sprayer. Well, electrostatic sprayer producing, throwing out, or dispersing a disinfectant is a great thing. But if you're dispersing the disinfectant onto dusty, dirty pipes and surfaces, it's not going to work. It has to have a clean surface in order for the electrostatic effect to take effect.
Sure.
So it's a matter of training. It's a matter of understanding. It's a matter of, and I'll go back to the first part, safety, efficacy, and cost, which is another reason why I am a strong endorser of Viking Pure. First of all, it is safe. I can wash my face for it. They use hypochlorous acid on debridement of wounds. Doctors use it in oral surgery. Orthopedics uses it on legs, on open wound sites. Ophthalmologists use it for eye care. And I just came from seeing one. Dermatologists use hypochlorous acid to get rid of eczema. It's great to get rid of eczema, but it is not limited to those areas. It is safe. And anything that gets on the floor, it breaks down into water and water. The Viking Pure has a product, has a membrane that is patented that removes all the salt that is used in there. The only salt that you'll find in the two solutions of Viking Pure, the sodium hydroxide and hypochlorous acid, is a trace amount of salt that's in the supply water. I was looking at a hospital yesterday, and they are using a glass cleaner. But when I looked at the sun coming through, I could see where that glass cleaner did not do its job. It remained, the residue of the glass cleaner remained there. The biggest thing that I can get across to people is we're not just asking people to go in there and make things look pretty. The concept of I know clean when I see it, that is balderdash. You can put whatever word in there you want. But seeing something does not mean that it's clean. I don't know clean when I see it. I know clean after I've seen the process of cleaning, of disinfecting, and using the proper amount of time. That I can tell when it's clean.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time, but before we go, I did want to address two of the questions that we had from the audience. The first one was from Carmela, and I know Doc R, you kind of gave her a link to address that, but wanted to open the floor. How do the concentrations of hypochlorous acid produced by white blood cells compare to the concentration required to kill hospital pathogens? Daniel, you want to take that one?
Yeah, very similarly, truthfully, the concentration of HOCl that you're going to find, via on-site generation, is going to be at an established minimum 200 parts per million free available chlorine. You may find higher concentrations of hypochlorous acid out there, but it's at those levels that that has kind of been established, if you will, through the EPA and their registration process and the efficacy requirements that they have to qualify as a hospital grade disinfectant to be effective. Technically, if a product is stated at 200 parts per million free available chlorine, all of their efficacy testing is done at a percentage of that called the lowest detectable limit. So typically somewhere around 150 parts per million, but it remains kind of, non-toxic, if you will, up to and exceeding 500 parts per million free available chlorine. So similar concentrations, but I think you'd find probably higher concentrations of HOCl in these types of on-site generation products than you would internally with your white blood cells. But I would check that via that reference that Dr. R shared. The reason why we kind of we reach for oxidizing agents in these specific situations is because oxidizers like bleach, hydrogen peroxide, hypochlorous acid, etc., are known to break down what Dr. Rode was speaking to earlier, the EPS, that in addition to deactivating the germs, makes these oxidizing agents ultimately effective in these applications. However, not all biofilms are created the same. I think we've kind of articulated that a bit today, and I don't want to underserve sometimes the need to utilize alkaline-based solutions, solutions that have a higher pH, that are going to allow for the emulsification of these soils from surfaces. When I say emulsification, the removal of these soils from surfaces so that you can adequately remove them mechanically with a microfiber and thus achieve the level of cleaning and disinfecting that we're all essentially striving to achieve. So sometimes bleach alone just can't do it, and we need to be able to utilize a two-step process where you're cleaning, justifying the cleanliness, and then obviously disinfecting.
For sure. Thank you for that. And then the last question. Oh,
May I add one thing?
Yeah.
As Dr. Rode knows, when a person gets sick, when they get an infection, their white blood cell count increases, which means the amount of hypochlorous acid in the body increases. As the infection goes away, the amount of hypochlorous acid, because the white blood cells are decreasing, the hypochlorous acid is decreasing, but it's still in the body. So to say how much it is comparing the amount of hypochlorous acid in blood as to compare to what Viking Pure produces, that's a nice question, but it's really not what we can't really say. It depends on how ill and how high the white blood count cell is.
Awesome. Thanks for that point. Last question. We're a little over time, so let's keep it brief. But in your opinion, are additives the best way forward for ensuring that antimicrobial resistance effects are not mitigated superficially? Anyone want to take that one?
Can you repeat that for me?
Yes. Are additives the best way forward for ensuring that AMR effects are not mitigated superficially? To be honest, I don't.
What do they mean by additives? The more that you put in, if you take hypochlorous acid and you add color, or if you add fragrance, preservatives, what you're doing is you're diluting the more it's like, correct me if I'm wrong here, Dan, but the more additives that you add to it, the less effective the product is going to be.
I think that, and I'm not sure exactly, what, our audience member, meant by additives. But, the way that I kind of think of it is in regard to the material makeup of the solutions that we're using. And I think the higher the list of additives, or ingredients, if you will, kind of on a product, the more opportunity there is for misuse, underuse, or the maintaining or prevalence of that solution on a surface after it's finished being used practically. So I would say that choosing products that have low level numbers of ingredients, minimal ingredients, products that revert back to water or natural solutions that can allow for easy removal, would certainly be ideal, I think, in avoiding biofilm formation. Dr. R, do you have anything to comment on that?
I not really. I would echo that from both you and John. Just a quick point I would make as we're running down on time here is that kind of bring us back to how critical it is for industry like Viking Pure, how critical it is for consultants, how critical it is for EVS professionals and IPs and medical lab scientists and microbiologists and healthcare professionals in general to get together. And to come to that understanding, that change of culture, because as John so eloquently talks about, it's not a one-man war or a one-human war. It is a big global problem, and it can be daunting, right? To think about it's like dealing with the national debt. How do we do with that? But if we don't get started and we work together, it's only going to get worse. And so I hope. One of the outcomes of these types of awesome webinars that you guys have presented is that people can start to come together. If you're a hospital or a healthcare entity and you don't have EVS at the table, you need to get them to the table. You need to sit down with these individuals and work on that culture change. If you don't have physicians and nurses at that table and pharmacists, you're kind of spinning your wheels. You need people on board. You need to understand biofilm. You need to understand AMR. To John's point, you need to understand it affects the bottom line, but ultimately it's your patient's safety and health that matters. And so using that point about why not 20 minutes? What's it going to take to get this done correctly? It may not be a new product. It may be a change in how we approach that problem.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, thanks everyone for sticking with us a little bit longer. I really hope this session was informative and educational. And again, just want to thank Rodney, Daniel, and John for joining us on this panel. It's been a great time today, and really appreciate your participation.
Thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you, guys. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone.